Good morning, everybody. I'm Tim O'Brien. I'm the senior executive editor of Bloomberg Opinion, and I am joined today by my old acquaintance, observer of the world, friend, journalist, Politico, Charlie Sykes.
Thank you.
Charlie, it's good to have you here this morning.
It is great to be here.
I'm in Wisconsin at the Republican National Convention, which is a coming out party for Donald Trump of many sorts. Charlie has watched Wisconsin politics forever, so he's going to have a lot to say about all of this. We'll get into the nitty gritty of both local electoral dynamics, national dynamics that are reflected here in Wisconsin, and various sundry other matters. But Charlie, let's start with the big news of the day. Donald Trump made a vice presidential pick yesterday, J.D. Vance, the Ohio senator, and tell me your first impressions of that.
Well, you pretty much have an encapsulation of the Republican, where the Republican Party is right now and where it's going. I will admit I was a little bit surprised because J.D. Vance brings, should we say, a lot of baggage. I've been looking for the quote. I think it's Mark Twain who describes somebody as being, having very few principles, and the principles he does have are bad. J.D. Vance is in many ways kind of an iconic figure in terms of his willingness to remake himself into the image of Donald Trump. A very, very firm, very, very open critic of Donald Trump, who's managed to morph himself into a really shameless Trump sycophant, but also on an ideological basis. This is a forward-looking choice. It's sort of mega MAGA ticket because J.D. Vance is very much in the post-conservative ideological wing of the party, very hostile to Ukraine, somebody who has been an apologist for both Vladimir Putin and for Viktor Orban, and somebody who really sort of doubles down on the populist nationalist approach of the Republican Party.
Who were you, if you were a betting man, who had you been betting on prior to the Vance announcement, and why? And in that context, why does Vance surprise you then?
I thought that Trump would go for somebody bold, lower key, because the vice president is the one person he can't fire, and Donald Trump doesn't want to be overshadowed in any way. And by the way, he clearly overshadowed J.D. Vance when he showed up at the convention last night. But I thought he would go for somebody who would be more conventional in that sense, somebody who would not be a lightning rod. But with J.D. Vance, look, J.D. Vance is not a safe choice. But it is the choice of somebody who obviously feels supremely confident about this election, because J.D. Vance doesn't expand the tent at all. J.D. Vance does not reach out to those moderate voters. And in fact, as more people find out some of the positions he's taken, I think it's going to give Democrats kind of a weapon. But I was thinking that since Donald Trump is haunted by the ghost of Mike Pence, somebody who actually had some principles and some conscience, that he would look for somebody that either would be so low key that would never challenge him, or that he could simply brush aside. But he went with one of the more flamboyant choices he could have made.
That's one of the interesting things. If you are applying to be Donald Trump's vice president, it might be necessary in your resume to say willing to be hung by protesters in Washington, because Trump didn't lift a finger when Mike Pence was famously endangered during the January 6th siege at the Capitol in 2021.
He won't want to hang me, because I'm willing to do what Mike Pence was not willing to do.
Well, the other thing I actually think are two important standards for Donald Trump with vice presidential picks is typically, as you just noted, he doesn't want somebody who could suck up more media energy and more of the media spotlight than him. And I think he certainly wants someone he knows who could pardon him for any crimes he may be convicted of. I think those are certainly two bellwether standards. I think, however, although Vance doesn't expand the ticket, in terms of Midwestern swing states, where you've got 3 of say 6 or 7 that are going to figure in November, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Ohio, he
Pennsylvania.
is strategically a pretty good choice there, right? To solidify his base and maybe get 2 undecided Republicans.
I understand that that's kind of the buzz, that this is aimed at the blue wall. I mean, there's no way that Joe Biden can win without winning Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Ohio's out of reach. I'm not
Oh, I
totally
mentioned
convinced
Ohio. I
of
meant to say
that.
I meant to say
Yep,
Pennsylvania.
yep.
Sorry. Yeah.
I am a little skeptical about this, because yes, JD Vance did win in Ohio. He won by 7 points. But I think that he trailed the rest of the ticket rather significantly. I believe, you can correct me, that Mike DeWine, the Republican governor, won by about 25 points when JD Vance was winning by 7 points. Also, suddenly now the stage changes rather dramatically. So how does JD Vance play in the suburbs? How does he play in those swing suburbs? I'm in Wisconsin, in the WOW suburbs, Waukesha, Ozaukee, Washington County. How does he play in the Pennsylvania suburbs? I understand the argument that he's going to appeal to the blue collar, white working class, that he's going to, peel off some of those union votes. And I'm guessing we're going to hear a lot of that rhetoric from him. But the fact is, Vance is not in the mainstream of American politics. Now, Donald Trump has been able to sort of rise above this because it's more personality than policy. But it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I do have a question about his appeal to suburban women. I mean, within about a week,
Yeah.
Tim, I'm guessing that a lot of people are going to be hearing those quotes. Abused women should not divorce their husbands because X, Y, and Z. And then there's, I mean, the Oppo research on this guy is really quite impressive, and we'll see whether or not the Democrats can effectively mobilize that. By the way, I don't know.
And including all of his previous, negative statements about Donald Trump, including comparing him to Hitler.
Yes, cultural heroin. And the
yeah,
voters are people who vote for him are idiots.
Yeah, he's been sort of bald-faced accepting that he just had a gargantuan revelation, and he shifted from being a wildly outspoken critic of Donald Trump to now being a mini-me fanboy, which I think the Democrats are going to be all over. They've already, started to, Biden described him as a Donald Trump clone. It certainly reflects a kind of confidence in Trump, in terms of making this pick that I really didn't expect. And that leads us to the momentum that Trump is riding right now in the wake of 2 seminal events that possibly could lose their steam by Election Day in November. We're still a long way off in electoral time. 4 months can be forever in politics. But obviously, Joe Biden's utter belly flop at the debate with Donald Trump, which I think, changed many supporters' view of Biden, and probably didn't convince all of those on the fence that he might be a better choice. And then, of course, and unfortunately and tragically, the shootings last weekend on Saturday in Butler, Pennsylvania, where Trump fortunately was not killed, but he was injured. And that has put him in sort of a rare political status right now of almost heroic proportions. And when he came out onto the stage at the Republican National Convention here in Milwaukee last night, he certainly got a hero's greeting. And he's toned down some of his rhetoric right now. I personally don't suspect that will last for now. Right. But he's not somebody, Charlie, as you know, who's ever shown the kind of discipline, strategic discipline that he needs to win over factions who don't support him. And he's shown a little bit of that lately. And then, of course, last night, I don't think he looked good. He looked tired when he came out, and he looked worn down by it all. But he certainly got a hero's greeting. And what do you think about all of the momentum that we're seeing right now around him?
Well, it is extraordinary. You know, a few months back, I wrote a piece describing Donald Trump as one of the luckiest men alive, and I had no idea. I mean, he's on a streak right now, and I don't think we should close our eyes to that. And I don't think that anyone should underestimate him. I mean, you've watched him for years and years and years, and he's a showman. He knows how to put on a show, and yet even he could not have scripted that moment on Saturday where he rose and raised his fist. I mean, that is going to be an iconic image. And so he's got that wind at his back. So he comes into Milwaukee as both a hero and as a martyr. And as a result of this, also, he's, has his critics back on their heels because, like, the Biden campaign takes down its ads. What can you say about him? And it's not just the debate. He also has had a series of legal wins that are rather extraordinary. He had the U.S. Supreme Court essentially granting him immunity, which eliminated the possibility of the New York trial. The sentencing from the 34 felony that was supposed to take place on July 11th. That's now been put off and in question. And then, of course, Eileen Cannon throws out the throws out the espionage case. So I think that
on the first day of the Republican National Convention, Charlie.
Yeah,
her timing
what a coincidence.
Yeah, I'm sure it was just a coincidence.
So we were thinking that.
Go ahead.
No, that is a gift to him. There's no gift because in terms of the luck, Donald Trump, twice impeached seditionist, convicted felon. We were thinking predator. That was going to be the frame. Sexual predator, serial sexual predator. And yet there you saw Donald Trump come out on that stage, his party, ecstatic, delirious, united behind him, the polls, leaning toward him. And the Democrats at the same time are, struggling to get out from under the covers because they're still so horrified by the series of events. And I think that, look, you and I have talked about this for years, and I don't want to attribute any skills to Donald Trump that he doesn't have, but he is a showman, and he is masterfully choreographing this moment. It is a long way to November, but he is on one of the most extraordinary political streaks that I can remember, where things have broken in ways that we did not expect in his favor.
And even in the context of his showmanship, it is his one sort of reptilian skill. He is not sophisticated. Yes. He is not well read. He is wildly narcissistic and egocentric. But he's always had a showman's instincts. But even his showman's instincts have been Carnivalesque, P.T. Barnum-esque. And one of the things that struck me during the debate with Biden is when that split screen was televised, Trump was a showman there, but he wasn't a showman in the way he actually was. He used restraint and he had a quizzical look on his face as Biden stumbled and fumbled that almost spoke for the audience's own shock, I think, at how badly Trump was performing. And that is not typically, Donald Trump is not an empath, by any stretch of the imagination. And yet, during that debate, he showed restraint, which that surprised me. And then obviously on the stage, after he was shot and he pumped his fist, he was trying to get his Secret Service protection out of the way because he understood the gold he had just been given on top of the tragedy he fortunately survived, in terms of, being able to capitalize on the imagery. He instinctively saw that. It'll be a question going forward, I think, whether or not, he can restrain himself appropriately, because he doesn't need his fist pumping base. The people that loved him on that stage, they don't need any more convincing, right? No. As you know, it's the moderate and independent voters who he needs to take on and convince.
Well, that's right. And that's why the choice of J.D. Vance was interesting, that he had this moment of unity. He was going to change directions. Within moments of the shooting, J.D. Vance was one of the people putting out the most incendiary sort of tweets, blaming it on Democrats. And a lot of people were saying, well, this is disqualifying, that he would be this demagogic, but then Trump named him. going back to Donald Trump and seizing this moment and understanding that this moment, I do think that it is the JD Vance pick is just a reminder that he's not going to become the kinder, gentler, more moderate Donald Trump. I think that's clear. But also, I mean, we also have to do the split screen of the Democrats. So while Donald Trump was on that stage in Milwaukee, you had Joe Biden sitting down with Lester Holt giving another one of his underwhelming press conferences. And I've been giving a lot of thought over, all of the effort have made to tell people about who Donald Trump is and the importance of stopping Donald Trump, the dangers of Donald Trump. And yet here we are in this moment. And with Joe Biden refusing to go anywhere, and I wonder what you think about this. That for so long the Democrats had figured that somebody else was going to take care of this for them. That the Republicans would break from Donald Trump, the legal system would take care of Donald Trump, that the voters would just become exhausted with Donald Trump. And yet here he is. And I do wonder, one of the big questions of 2024 is, are the Democrats up for this challenge? Because rather than deal with the question of who are we going to put up who's most effectively able to stop Donald Trump, I think that there was a default setting there that this was going to take care of itself. And yet here we are on a day when he is now the dominant figure in American politics. And Joe Biden continues this, and I'm sorry to say, just his various efforts to reassure the voters, I don't know that are hitting. And so the Democrats are kind of stuck in this limbo/purgatory.
Well, I don't think Biden's appearances have been reassuring. His first one out of the gates was with George Stephanopoulos, wasn't reassuring. He gave an Oval Office, chat in the wake of the Trump shooting that also wasn't perfect. He did a presser last Friday night that wasn't very reassuring. He did the Lester Holt interview last night on NBC. I didn't find that completely reassuring either. So I think the Joe Biden who was forgiven for his stumbles or not being nonlinear or losing track of subjects he was being asked about, who he was forgiven for those things prior to the debate, and I don't think he's going to be forgiven for those things anymore.
No.
In the catalog of effective things Democrats did against Donald Trump, it shouldn't be forgotten that Joe Biden beat him in 2020, and Joe Biden may have been the only candidate in 2020 who could do that. And he pulled together a coalition that brought it home. But the Joe Biden of 2024 is not the Joe Biden of 2020. And I think the existential crisis the Democrats have to deal with is they probably should have thought about this a year ago. And Biden should have demonstrated some humility around that process rather than having it come to a debate and a kind of Rorschach test and an unplanned march towards trying to figure out whether to hang on to Joe Biden or find a replacement for him. And then Trump benefits from these unexpected surges. It's as you mentioned earlier, the stars have aligned for the GOP in the moment right now. It may not last, but here we are. Yeah. And the other thing I think that came out of the shooting, one of the most effective talking points I think for Democrats is that Donald Trump is an insurrectionist and an authoritarian. And you had some of the language coming out of the shooting. Well, the violence that happened in Butler, Pennsylvania was due to JD Vance promulgated this myth as well, that Democrats talking about Trump's authoritarian impulses invited violence, and we need to stop talking that way. It was politicized by the GOP very quickly, and the Democrats are going to have to figure out how to respond to that.
Well, they need to figure out immediately, and I think this is a crucial point, is that we have been warning, I'm not a Democrat, but we have been warning about the threats to democracy and for years. And one of the great threats to democracy is violence. So I think what we need to also say is, look, we need to continue those warnings. This act of violence cannot silence the warnings. It's also important to make a distinction between very sharp and very accurate criticism of the dangers that Donald Trump poses without endorsing in any way violence. I mean, and I think that's a distinction that can be made, but it's clearly muddled the water. But can I go back to the point you're making about the Democrats sort of kind of sleepwalking into 2024? They have a Biden problem, but I worry that they have a larger problem that may impact their ability to go forward in 2024, which is that I think that what was exposed at that debate was the fact that a lot of people have been living in their own bubble. I mean, we all know about the right-wing bubble, the alternative information bubble, but I think a lot of Democrats and people on the left had been living in a, eyes wide shut approach to what was happening with Joe Biden. They just simply were not paying attention. They didn't care about it. They decided to discount it. So while the polls continue to flash all of these warning signs, the Democrats were content to look the other way, not pay any attention to it. And then suddenly they had a reality check. And I guess what I'm wondering, Tim, is that is their bubble just confined to Joe Biden's age and cognitive abilities, or are there other things that are happening that they are just tone deaf to, that they are not seeing? And I'm sorry to go off here, but I mean, I was, sitting reading various things. Yeah.
But let's stop
No,
on
go
that
ahead.
point and talk about inflation for a second, right?
Yes,
As an issue and how the Democrats have positioned themselves around it. Joe Biden and his team, I think, have been masterful stewards by and large of U.S. economic policy in the wake of COVID. We've had job growth, wage growth, GDP growth. The United States economy has outperformed its global peers. Incredible kudos on the economy to the Biden White House. The bugaboo hanging over all of this has been inflation and massively spiking inflation that hit working Americans very hard. And it has since receded. It has plateaued and receded. It's clearly not the issue now that it was even a year ago. But it really isn't inflation, right? Like, so the in terms of where this is landing, I think for working class and middle class voters, it's not simply that their groceries are becoming more expensive and gas is becoming more expensive, which are both true, but it's this broader affordability issue around the American dream. Like, how can I buy a home? How can I send my kids to college? How can I save for my own retirement? And going back to 2008, in the wake of the financial crisis, I think both parties did a very poor job of addressing how the financial crisis undermined the American dream for working class and middle income American voters. And I think the Democrats still now haven't gotten their arms around how to talk about this broader affordability issue in the American dream.
Oh, I think that's an excellent point. And sometimes these things have a delayed effect because the reality is that the social contract that many people grew up with was torn up, some time ago. People don't have pensions anymore. They don't have the same kind of job security. They don't have a sense of loyalty. And when you have that kind of anxiety out there, you look around and go, okay, do people understand, that, I mean, we have hundreds of millions, tens of millions of people who are retiring right now. Now, in the, 20, 30 years ago, they had pensions. They could count on Social Security. Now, many of those people, have not put aside enough money. So, I mean, there are lots of anxieties in terms of affordability out there. And I think that there was a long time when both political parties seemed to simply talk past them. And I do sense that. And there is that sort of cognitive dissonance between the fact that the economy is very strong, it's very robust, it is going well, but people don't feel it. And so I think that one of the things people need to understand is the degree of American anxiety, and because there are so many things that people are feeling anxious about. Some of it's rational, and some of it's not rational. But this is the world we actually live in.
Charlie, we have a question from our audience, one of our TikTok users, who asks that Joe Biden's failure to step aside is a major disappointment, no different than the GOP refusing to drop Donald Trump. Is that a fair comparison? One of our viewers asks. What do you think of that?
I believe that it is, and I understand how people are going to react to all of that. In fact, I have to say that, it was disappointing to me watching the kind of hostile reaction that we had from many of the Democratic base to even questions about Donald Trump. How dare you not fall into line? Well, this was what Republicans, went through for years and years and years. Republicans shut down the criticism of Donald Trump. They silenced the doubts. Now, Democrats, I think, are a much healthier political party. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this discussion. They are not a cult. And yet, there were elements of the party that basically said, no, you need to shut up and sit down. We're not going to even talk about this. From Joe Biden's point of view, he's 81 years old, and he has a decision to make. And the way he has talked about it has been disappointing. I am disappointed. I voted for him. I intended to vote for him again. But I'm very disappointed that this is a man who is faced with the choice of, do you put your country over your party, or is it about you? And I have to say that he's putting his legacy at great risk, because if he loses this election, that's what he's going to be remembered for. He's going to be remembered as Ruth Bader Biden, as the guy who just would not retire, who insisted on running, and blown out by Donald Trump with all of the dangers that entails. So yes, I find it very disappointing.
This long career of public service and significant political and policy achievements. And of course, I think leading the country across this bridge in 2020 away from Donald Trump, away from fascism, away from the kind of divisive racial and class warfare that Donald Trump loves.
You think how grateful his party would be. You think if he pulled a George Washington and stepped away, nobody would think he's running away from the field. They would say, this was a successful one-term president. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. But sticking in and going through all of this, unfortunately, I think that's what he's going to be remembered for.
Charlie, I'm shocked to discover that politicians of every stripe are egocentric, and sometimes to the exclusion of doing what might be right for voters or the American public. I can't, since we're here in Wisconsin together, you're a resident. I grew up in the Midwest, but now I'm an East Coaster, but I'm here in Milwaukee for the RNC. And I think some of the electoral dynamics in Wisconsin itself, Wisconsin is a swing state. It's going to be pivotal in November. It's the swingiest, right? It's verged from, Scott Walker, a Republican governor, to Tony Evers, a Democratic governor in the blink of an eye. There's been closely fought battles locally here over the makeup of the state Supreme Court. And obviously there's a Senate race hotly contested here, and various other dynamics. There's also been the classic rural, suburban, urban divide, the deindustrialization in Wisconsin, the corporatization of farming in the state left rural voters, I think, foundationless and afraid. There's been a big turn among rural voters to the GOP, going back to the 1990s here. But then traditionally Republican suburbs and, big suburban counties like Waukesha County and Washington County have gone bluer. And then you've got big urban centers like Madison and Milwaukee that are blue, but the Democrats also have to mind their P's and Q's and turn those voters out. And I'm wondering, as you look at that very interesting landscape, how do you see this unfolding between now and November? Do you have a good sense of where you see the local electoral dynamics and how that speaks to other swing states that are in play?
Well, I think I did before the debate and before the events of the last 72 hours. So, I mean, nobody knows anything right now, but your analysis is absolutely correct. I mean, Wisconsin, let's just break this down into a couple of categories. Rural Wisconsin has become more and more Republican. And the question is, though, how big a vote can Donald Trump get there? But again, you have counties in Wisconsin that voted for Barack Obama twice that voted for Trump. So that's been an issue. Then you also have the big urban centers. The Democrats have two giant vote machines, Dane County, which is Madison, and Milwaukee County, but they're very different. Dane County is an amazing, just in terms of the number of votes, the margins that are coming out of Dane County. They need to maximize the vote, and that's probably going to happen no matter what. The big question mark is Milwaukee. Milwaukee's vote will, in fact, vacillate up and down. Hillary Clinton lost Wisconsin back in 2016 because the undervote in Wisconsin, in Milwaukee was so great. She got 40,000 fewer votes than Barack Obama did. But I'm also very, very interested in the suburbs you described, the so-called WOW counties in Milwaukee, Waukesha, Ozaukee, and Washington counties. These used to be the beating heart of the Republican Party in southeastern Wisconsin. These were counties that generated massive turnout, really sort of maximum turnout. I mean, 80+% turnout of the vote, but also massive Republican margins. Since Donald Trump came along, Republicans still win, but the margins have been declining, as they have in suburbs around the country. I'm in Ozaukee County, which is directly north of Milwaukee. We're verging toward a 50-50 county, at least in some of the communities here. So that's one of the real battlefields. So Wisconsin always comes down to
that's largely
turnout.
That's largely driven by distaste for Donald Trump among
Yes.
suburban voters, particularly women.
Yes.
You know, his language, his policies, abortion is a driving factor in a lot of that too, right?
Well, abortion's already proved to be very potent here in Wisconsin. That Supreme Court election was a landslide for the liberal candidate, which is extraordinary in Wisconsin, where every election is decided statewide by about 20,000 votes. And she just blew her opponent away, and she was a flawed candidate. So abortion's very, very potent, and it will be very potent here in the suburbs. And by the way, you can see this in the numbers. The number of Republican voters who go out and they'll even vote for Ron Johnson, but they won't vote for Donald Trump. So we'll see whether that's the case again this year. But both parties will have a tremendous job on their hands of maximizing the vote they have. The thing about Wisconsin is we're so polarized. There are very, very few swing voters. So the question is, who's more enthusiastic? Who can generate the turnout in Dane County, Milwaukee County? Can the Republicans, massive numbers of first-time voters in rural Wisconsin? We just don't know. So that's why measures like mood and vibe and enthusiasm are so crucial in a state like Wisconsin.
And right now, mood and vibe and enthusiasm seems to be firmly in Donald Trump's corner. But as you know, that can be an evaporating asset in presidential elections.
It can be. There's a lot that can happen. Yeah.
We're close to the clock running here. I really appreciate you spending time with me today. We do this every Tuesday at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time, our Bloomberg Opinion Politics live stream. And Charlie, I hope you can come back when the plot and the battle thickens as we get closer to November.
Anytime. Thank you. It's great talking with you, Tim.
Thanks, Charlie Sykes. Good to see you.
Thank you.